Psalm 40. This is interesting. I was studying this lesson and I thought, I'm not so sure that this is a lesson I should be teaching this week. But I got confirmation this morning as I was going through. I'll tell you about it when we get to it. Do you know that John Phillips has named every psalm? He's put a title to every psalm. And in the table of contents, his commentary, you go to Psalm 8, it gives you the title for his title for that psalm. The title for Psalm 73, which was the one we've studied the last 2 weeks, was the deceitfulness of riches. Remember what we talked about. The one for today, Psalm 40, is past triumphs and present troubles. So, Psalm 40, past triumphs and present troubles. Psalm 40, Psalm 40, like Psalm 37, 38, and 39, which we have not studied, is a plea for deliverance from suffering as the consequence of personal sin. Suffering as a result of the consequences of personal sin. What you bring on yourself, more or less. Okay? Acknowledgement of personal sin is a big deal. Personal sin must be confessed before God, even if you know Jesus. Even if you die without confessing it, you're forgiven of it. But you are separated from God if you are living with unconfessed sin in your life. There's a separation that's just naturally going to be there. The rough outline for Psalm 40 is right here. The first 4 verses deal with deliverance experienced by a psalmist in the past. He had an experience in the past, and he's going to talk about that. Verses 5 through 10 is an avowal of personal faithfulness and witness, and you will love those verses, I promise you. Verse 11 and 12 brings you into the current, and it's a description of the need for divine aid right now. So he had this stuff in verse 1 through 4 that he goes through. He's already been dealt with by God with that. Verse 11 and 12 is what he needs now. What have you done for me lately, God? He's saying, he's going to ask him, he's going to be talking about it there in 11 and 12. And then verse 13 and 17 is a plea for speedy deliverance. What other kind would you want, right? Speedy deliverance when you're having a problem. Okay, let's understand a couple of things. The first point of the outline says he experienced deliverance from sin problems in the past. He's going to talk about that. We're going to see it. He's had some sin problems, and God delivered him from them. That's what that first outline point is. The third outline point says he has a need for help from God right now, in the present, in his present, in the area of sin problems again. We're going to see his problem is sin. And this is King David we're talking about. I don't know if he was king then, but it's David. The third point, the outline indicates that he has an expectation of deliverance, and from the person with experience with God, he has that expectation because he has experienced it before. You trusted God, you asked for his deliverance, and he delivered you. Now you need him again. It's a lot easier to ask him again because you've got experience with him, and that's what we're going to be talking about. The question is, if he has been delivered before, why does he find himself right there again, needing deliverance only God can provide? God delivered him, now he's right back there again, still having problems. Why is that? Why is that? Because he's human, right? He has a chronic, as we have, a chronic propensity to sin that is called a sinful nature. We have sinful natures, so we sin. I need to get that straight. Just because we get saved doesn't mean all that goes away. Okay, verse 1. Let's read Psalm 40, verse 1. I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. This is in the first 4 verses are in the first outline point. He experienced deliverance in the past, and this is what this is talking about. He said, I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. The theme of God, of waiting for God to act in the midst of trouble that began in Psalm 37. We haven't studied Psalm 37, but we've got a series of chapters here, 37, 38, 39, and 40, that are kind of tied together. It began in Psalm 37, it continues through 38 and 39, and it's found once again in chapter 40, verse 1. And all of these Psalms are talking about waiting on the Lord. What do we say is our biggest problem? We want it right now. Waiting is the problem. We don't want to wait. But we have to understand what waiting on the Lord means. And we also have to learn how to wait. It's a bummer, but it's true. In Psalm 37, I'm not sure I wrote that right. In Psalm 37:29, God's response was anticipated and hoped for. Let me see what Psalm 37:29. No, it's Psalm 37 through 39, through those chapters. 37 through 39, God's response was anticipated and it was hoped for. He hoped for his response, and it was anticipated that he would get one. In Psalm 40, it is an experienced reality. He was not waiting. Those first 4 verses show that he's already received it. This is stuff that was in the past, and he's already experienced deliverance. We're going to see that before we finish those 4 verses. Now, here's what I found this morning. I was reading this stuff, and I thought, how did I choose Psalm 40 to teach today? Well, I read through them, and I thought, well, that looks like a good one to teach, so I'll just teach that one. We are going to be looking at a lot of verses out of Psalm 37 today. We're going to be looking at a lot of verses out of 38, out of 39, and out of the whole of chapter 40. I got up this morning, and the most part of it we're going to look at is going to be dealing with waiting on the Lord. I got up this morning, and this was on my computer. The Power of Patience. And it's based on Psalm 37. So what I just said was that Psalm 37 through 40 deal with waiting on God in various ways, okay? And what I got on my computer this morning was this article from ICR. It's called Days of Praise. I get one every day. This one is about the power of patience. And in that, he talks about the principles of gaining patience. I could not believe this because it's Psalm 37, and that's where we're going to be starting with that. The principles of gaining patience during this life are outlined in Psalm 37. First, we trust. Whoops. I guess I don't need to write it on the board. We trust. That's 37:3. We trust in the Lord. You can look at them. Well, I was going to read them. We delight in the Lord. That's 37:4. We commit our way to the Lord. That's verse 5. And we rest or be still in the Lord. That is verse 7. And then they jump all the way to 37:4. We wait on the Lord. So if you want to learn how to be patient in waiting on the Lord, that's what you have to do. If you're going to wait, you got to be patient. That's a good outline for the procedure about how you do it. You trust in God, you delight in His ways, you commit yourself to Him, you rest in the Lord, and you wait on the Lord. All right, so I'm not going to talk about a lot about that, but it's just that I thought it was really, really interesting that this was on my computer when I got up this morning. So in this theme of waiting, those 4 chapters have a theme of waiting on the Lord, waiting on Him to what? To act. We're always waiting on God. We're not waiting on Him to walk through the door. We're not waiting on Him to come down. We're waiting on Him to act on our behalf for some reason, for something, to deliver us, to guide us, to whatever it is. But we're waiting on Him to act. The theme of waiting on God to act in these 4 Psalms, then, there's 2 Hebrew verbs. And this is kind of neat. I'm going to write this down. One of them is YHL, and the other one is QWH. You will never see those again, okay? But they were always used in waiting for the Lord. That's their primary uses. Okay, waiting for the Lord. The YHL carries the primary sense of endurance, the willingness to hang in there faithfully for the long term. Like, they didn't think it was long term waiting on Jesus to come back in the day of Paul. To me, I think it's imminent, but I'm willing to wait long term. It's been 2,000 years for them, maybe 2,000 years for me too. Chapter 37, verse 7 says this. Verse 7. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for Him. Do not fret when men succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes. We spent a lot of time talking about it in Psalm 73. Asaph was wondering why God wasn't blessing him while he was watching all this wickedness around him, all these guys getting rich off of evil, wicked, and illegal, whatever reason, they were getting rich. And so what Asaph learned was he needed to be patient and just watch all that happen. Just got to be happy with watching it happen, knowing that someday God is going to act. Okay? Psalm 38, verse 15 says, I wait for you, O Lord. You will answer, O Lord my God. The thing with writing notes in your Bible, sometimes you can't read them. This carries a prolonged, patient waiting, but a waiting with expectation nonetheless, rather than answer. Then himself, he waits on God to do it. I wait for you, O Lord. Okay? On the other one, the QWH, it emphasizes intense expectancy, or intense expectancy, as the thing hoped for is about to happen now. I have a hope, and I think it's going to happen right now. I have every reason to think God will answer me right now. That's the hope. Okay? This does not mean it will happen right now. Why? Because there is no way to know. He is waiting on God, and God acts in his own time. So there's all kinds of ways to look at waiting. 37:34 says, I think I might have read that one already. 37:34. Wait for the Lord and keep his way. He will exalt you to possess the land. When the wicked are cut off, you will see it. What I had in my Bible was, it might be in your last breath. He says you will see it. Well, you might actually see it when you're on your way out of this world, okay? But he says, wait for the Lord and keep his way. Stay in his will. He says you will see it in this sense, but it may be, you may see it right now, but you may not see it until you end up leaving on your way out of the world. And then it brings us to Psalm 40, verse 1. Let me read 40, verse 1 more time. I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. This is the experienced reality. This has happened. He heard me. He turned to me and he heard my cry. God heard and answered. We must realize it was not instantaneous. He said, I waited patiently. You know what John Phillips says? The literal translation of that is, I waited patiently. I waited and waited and waited. Okay? We read that, he said, oh man, he heard me and he turned to me, he heard me, he answered me. Yeah, but I waited and I waited and I waited. All right. It probably fits in there. I don't know if it's the same. Yeah, yeah. It's probably same kind of thing. You get you talked about second advent or first advent?
I guess the first advent. Well, I guess you could talk either.
Well, they waited a long time for that first advent, and they're still waiting on the second, and so are we. All right, so we need to develop a solid understanding of the word wait as used in the Bible. Those two verbs, YHL and QWH, are usually used in waiting for the Lord to act. We must understand that waiting involves the passage of time. You know, if you're waiting on something, you can look at your watch, and between the time you start waiting and the time you end waiting, the clock is going to move, the hands are going to move. Okay, it involves the passage of time. And here's what I wrote, waiting for a long time does not necessarily mean waiting for a long period of time. There is a red light at Forest and Webb Chapel. I cannot tell you how many times I have gotten to the front of the left turn lane just as it turned red. And I've been there so many times, I know it's a long wait. You know? But you know what? If I had to wait that long for Jesus to come, it's not that long, right? Waiting and the passage of time is all relative. It's what I want you to realize. We're talking about relative periods of time. What seems long in one respect is not long at all in another. Okay? So the psalmist David waited patiently. It said he waited patiently. He waited and he waited and waited. He said, for the Lord, and he turns to me, it says. He turned to me. This gives it a personal touch, but there is no doubt about who God is responding to. Let's say you and me and Eva, or as a class, we're all talking, and if somebody walked in this room and he wanted to respond to what Wayne was saying, he would turn to Wayne and say, I'm talking to Wayne. We know he was talking to David. He turned to David, is what this is saying. And it says that he heard my cry. Okay, verse 2. He lifted me out of the slimy pit. This has already been dealt with. These first 4 verses. I want you to remember that. This is in the past. He's already been dealt with. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and the mire. He set my feet on a rock. He gave me a firm place to stand. I was in the slimy pit. Slimy, slippery, impossible to gain traction. Have you ever been on something that is so slippery? If you're on a creek bank and the water runs over, it's been running over so long, moss growing on the rock, that's a slippery rock. This is the kind of slippery we're talking about. You can't walk in it. It's also referred here to, he lifted him out of the mud and the mire. Some of the translations say sticky mud. I think of Texas clay stuck on a shovel. You can't shake it off. It's on there for good. That's the kind of sticky mud I'm talking about. It's not a pretty picture. It's impossible to move around, and God lifted me out of it. He delivered me from it, and then what did he do for me? He put me on a firm place, it says, to stand. And what can be firmer than a rock? He put me on a rock. Took me out of that slippery, slimy mud and mire and put me on a safe, dry, firm rock to stand. Verse 3 says, he put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see and fear and put their trust in the Lord. So he did not deliver me just to leave me standing there. He gave me a new song. This is a renewed outlook or a new perspective and a new reality. This is like Asaph in Psalm 73. Remember, we had 3 things right here. We had orientation, the 3 steps that he was going through. He was properly oriented in the way he looked at God. Then he got disoriented with the way he looked at God, and he lost his trust in God being good. That was what was under question: is God good or not? He was not properly oriented. He lost his orientation. Then he heard God and got reoriented again. Okay, and this is what's happened. He's got a new song. He was lost, he needed deliverance, and then when he got delivered, he got a new song. And that deliverance, or that reorientation that Asaph felt, was what I told you was he was given a new freedom, because he had that problem that he needed God to deal with was settled and behind him. He got a new freedom to more fully worship God. And that's what happens here when he gets a new song. He's got a new song. He's got a new perspective on how things are with God. He's encountered the reorientation on his perspective of God, and as he was delivered from the problem, he was free to worship God. And then I said, I'm not going to go back and look at it, but if you look at chapter Psalm 73, I'm going to go look at it because it was so wonderful. When Asaph got his reorientation, here's what he said. Chapter 73, verse 23 to 26. He says, "Yet I am always with you. You hold me by my right hand." This is the guy that was doubting the goodness of God. Remember, he saw all of those wicked people being blessed, getting blessed financially, and he wasn't. Then he figured out, he got the word from God, and then he understood, I have to wait on God to act. Basically, that was the end result. And this is how he felt. Yet I am always with you. I know you are always with me, but what that says is, now I understand that means that I am always with you. I am always with God. He's always with me, but now I realize I'm also always with him. You guide me with your counsel, and afterward you will take me into glory. Who am I in heaven but you, and being with you I desire nothing on earth. All those things he wanted were originally on earth. Then he said, I don't need those anymore. He said, all I have is in heaven is you. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. So that's kind of where David is right here in verse 3, chapter 40. And what happens as a result of his deliverance is the giving of a testimony. That's what gets me. Look at what he said here. Many will see. No, he said, you put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see and hear and put their trust in the Lord. What happens is the result of his deliverance is the giving of testimony, not silence. He's delivered, and for him it is exciting. He has to tell somebody. It's not silence, but spoken words and hymns of praise, so that many will see, fear the Lord, and put their trust in God. Then you get to verse 4. Verse 4 says, blessed is the man who makes the Lord his trust, who does not look to the proud, to those who turn aside to false gods. What we get here is a clarification of what happens when one sees, fears, and trusts God. He is blessed. He's blessed. He is kept separate from those who follow false gods, and he is kept separate from the proud and the arrogant, who are the oppressively wicked of those guys we saw in Psalm 73. The oppressively wicked, the ones that Asaph found himself envying before he learned to wait on God. He learned he had to wait on God. Okay, the second outline point is, so that was God dealing with, he's looking back and talking about being deliverance, the deliverance he experienced in the past. And this brings him to a point where he gives an avowal of personal faithfulness. Verse 5 says this, many, O Lord my God, are the wonders you have done. These things, this is his avowal of personal faithfulness. Many, O Lord my God, are the wonders you have done. Things you planned for us, no one can recount to you. Were I to speak and to tell of them, they would be too many to declare. Nobody will argue with that in this room. I could go on and on about this verse. We'll just look at it just a little bit. But in verse 5a, the first part, he says, it drives our thoughts to creation. For sure. But there are so many, that was the first thought when I read that, was about creation. Your wonders, the things, he says, your wonders you have done. I think my first thought was about creation. Then I got to thinking about that. There's a lot more than creation. Creation is where it started. But there are so many things, other things, that we're drawn to, and that being the cross. Shay talked about it this morning. He talked about what the benefits of the cross. And these were things that were written down by God, planned by God before creation. What we get from the cross is adoption as sons. Remember he talking about that? He spent a lot of time talking about adoption and what it means to be adopted. That's part of the wonders of what God did, and he planned it for us before creation, knowing what kind of creepy people we're going to turn out to be. He planned for our redemption. He planned for our pardon. He planned for our justification, and a long chain of God-like miracles of love that proceed from it. Those are Spurgeon's words. It started at creation, and his wonders, too many to write down, and it goes all the way through the cross. And that's what David is talking about. He doesn't know about the cross yet, but he's talking about the wonders that God has provided for him. The middle part of that verse, he said, you had us, well, I said, you had us on your mind when you planned them. You had it when you planned those wonders. You had us. He had me on his mind. He had you on his mind when he planned all of those wonders. Then in the third part of that verse, there's too many to speak of, too many to declare, but that does not mean we are to be silent about it. Now, think about that. Too many to speak of, too many to declare, so I guess I'll just be quiet. No, that's not what it means. It means not to be silent. He said, look at verse. What I've written here is our testimony should ring out. Just kind of run together. Verse 6 says, this is kind of interesting. Verse 6 says this: sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but my ears you have pierced. My ears you have pierced. That's going to be neat when you hear this. Burnt offerings and sin offerings you did not require. Sacrifice and offerings you did not desire. This is his personal avowal of faithfulness, all right? He realizes that sacrifice and offerings you did not desire, and burnt offerings and sin offerings you did not require. We'll talk about pierced ears in a minute. Desire and require, that's pretty big words, talking about God and his sacrificial system. The first two, sacrifice and offerings, he did not desire, were made. Those two are made through a shared meal celebrating communion with God. And the first offering is made out of a grateful gift to God. So you got those two things, and they're on one end of the spectrum. The second two are the burnt offering and the sin offering. The burnt offering doesn't involve a meal. What is a burnt offering? What happens to a burnt offering? Burned up completely. There is nothing to eat. And the sin offering has nothing to do with gratitude. What's a sin offering for? Penance, forgiveness of your sin. That's all the way at the other end. It's got nothing to do with gratitude. So you got those first two are over here on community, communion, and gratitude, and you got these other two over here that are just completely the opposite of what those first two are. So you've got these four things are representative of the entire range of the sacrificial system. And of that entire range of the sacrificial system, David says, you don't desire it and you don't require it. So what is it all about? I'm telling you, it's got something to do with pierced ears. Isn't that strange? God did not desire it, the first two, and he did not require the last two. What he really wanted was for you to have pierced ears. How many, your ears pierced, Wayne? Mine aren't either, and yours aren't either. I bet everybody else in here is pierced. I'm pretty sure. What he really wanted was for us to have pierced ears. The ears of the psalmist, God pierced. It said, but my ears you have pierced. God pierced his ears. Now, that's not what it's talking about. If you're actually looking at the literal translation, it means you have opened my ears to hear him speak. That's exactly right. You got the left end of the spectrum, which was communion and gratitude. The right end had to do with burnt offerings, everything, and sin offerings, where you're trying to get your salvation taken care of. He said, that's not what I want either. I want you to have pierced ears. He said, I'm going to open your ears. And what do you do with your ears? You hear. You listen. All right. Meaning he wants us to have a new openness to do God's divine will. And we're going to see that in verse 8. We're going to see what he's actually talking about in verse 8. Okay, before we get to verse 8, let's do verse 7. Verse 7 says this. Verse 7, then he said, here I am, I have come. Then I said, here I am, I have come. It is written about me in the scroll. I have no foggy idea what that's talking about. I think what it has to do with what he wrote down. I read several commentaries about that, and I don't like any of them. I didn't like any of them. I'm on verse 7 right now. I hadn't gotten to verse 8. I'm talking about verse 7. We're going to do verse 8 after I do verse 7. But verse 8 is talking about the thing. Here I have come. Huh? I'm reading it right now. No, I said I'm going to read it in a minute. Right now we're going to do verse 7. Verse 7. Then he said, here I am, I have come. It is written about me in the scroll. I didn't like anything that they said in any commentary I read about that. What I think it has to do with is Psalm 139:16. And I'm going to read it. And it has to do, Psalm 139:16. (139:16) says, well, I'll start right at the end of verse 15. When I was woven together in the depths of the earth, your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. I have loved that verse from the second that I discovered it. Everything about me has been written down before creation. And I think what that verse 7 is talking about is David is saying, I am here in response to what you have written about me already. And then he said it about the pierced ears in verse 7, points to verse 8. And verse 8 says, to do your will, O my God, is my desire. Your law is written within my heart. Now we go to verse 8. I can't go any slower, man. I'm in passing gear right now. There's no way. There's no way to slow down right now, man. I'm going around cars. Verse 8, he says, it's a sweet verse. What can we say about this? It is plain to see he wants to do God's will in a heartfelt way and not in rote response to rituals of the law. Going back to that verse, whatever it was, verse 6. In a heartfelt, he wants to do God's will. He wants his ears are opened up. He wants to listen to God, and he wants to respond to God's will. Okay. Verse 9 says, and I said how funny because I think it is funny. Verse 9 says this, I proclaim, no, I don't think all of it's funny, but he said, I proclaim righteousness in the great assembly. I do not seal my lips, as you know, O Lord. Have you ever talked to God that way? As you know, God. It's like you're standing before in a board meeting, and you're saying, as you guys know, as you know. Talking before God, as you know, God. I do not seal my lips. Okay, verse 9, he says, he proclaims righteousness. You witnessed by talking and witnessing to it. And the funny part I said was, as you know, God. He already knew he didn't have sealed lips. And then the last part of this second part, we'll stop there, is verse 10. I do not hide your righteousness in my heart. I speak of your faithfulness and salvation. I do not conceal your love and your truth from the great assembly. What an awesome verse. This is the Old Testament equivalent of the New Testament gospel. Think about those things that he said. He doesn't hide it in his heart. Look at that, our verse of the week, 2 Timothy 1:7. 2 Timothy 1:7 said this: For God did not give us a spirit of timidity or cowardice, but a spirit of power, of love, and of self-discipline. We don't deal with that power as a power of timidity with sealed lips. We are not timid. We're not to be timid about that. We're to be able to speak it. He didn't. Uh, what is that word? Hide it in his heart. I already read it. He speaks of God's righteousness. He speaks of His faithfulness, His salvation, and the salvation He can only provide, and His love and His truth. That was those five verses were His avowal of personal faithfulness, and that sounds like a pretty faithful guy the way he described that. And we get to what his new problem is in verse 11 and 12. I'm just going to read them. We'll pick it up there next week, but let me read it. Do not withhold your mercy from me. So it's all really fun and games up to now. Everything really positive. He talked about how he delivered in the first 4 verses. He's already been delivered. Then he talked about his faithfulness, how wonderful God is, how much he loves him, and all that stuff. Then he gets to verse 11 and he says, do not withhold your mercy from me, O Lord. May your love and your truth always protect me. For troubles without number surround me. My sins have overtaken me, and I cannot see. They are more than the hairs of my head, and my heart fails within me. We're going to pick it up right there next week. So he's now into the reason for the psalm. I got problems, God. I got problems, serious problems. I need some help. So we'll stop there. We'll pick it up at verse 11 next week.